Welcome to We Are Everyone, a video and podcast series powered by Pivotal Moments, and we focus on the intersection of mental wellness in the workforce. We bring together young professionals and mindful executive mentors to bridge the generational gap and bring to the surface conversations about the importance of mental wellness and how to overcome career tradition challenges. Mental wellness is paramount. Join us. Welcome to We Are Everyone and / mental recess, since we are changing our name. I am very excited to have a special guest today, also DMV based. I guess you'd say, I always like to, I'm not sure if we want to put all of the letters after your name, but we can always say licensed professional. That's the most important part. But we have Miki Goerdt. And we're going to be talking about today the beauty of self-awareness. So Miki, I always like to start by having our guests kind of give a little bit of background on themselves and kind of, what you do and what you love.
Yes, thanks for having me here at the show, first of all.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, nice to be found by you.
Right? Power of Google.
Yeah. So I'm Miki Goerdt, and I'm identified as East Asian, Japanese immigrant, and I'm a licensed social worker and a board certified art therapist and an artist. So there's many different identities here. Yeah. And I have a private practice in Falls Church, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. And in my practice, I see primarily clients who are people of color and older adults. I'm also an adjunct faculty professor in George Washington University's art therapy department for the past 2 semesters now. And then before that, I was teaching as an adjunct professor at George Mason University in social work department.
Awesome. So art therapy, I just find that I love the fact that is, again, I am not someone who studied, I took my throes of psychology in high school and college and all that jazz, but not as familiar with the different types of branches or departments or I guess studies within that. So I love to see that art therapy has become so pronounced.
Yes.
As you can see, I love art. It's something that I surround myself every day by it to make me happy. And I just think the practice of these creative different parts of your brain can activate, those positive thoughts and all that jazz. So I guess, you definitely have, swimmer, you touch on to a lot of points, right? And probably put on a variety of different hats on throughout your days. So I'm just kind of curious, how did you discover your love of art and therapy? And then did one lead to another in regards to everything else that you do, from clinical social work and, to teaching and all of that jazz?
Yeah. So let's start with art, maybe. And art has been my mode of expression from when I was very little, elementary school and on. And then when I became 16, I found oil painting as the thing. So then I've been painting ever since then. I also do printmaking and mixed media art right now. But so that's kind of where art has been, right, with me. So that's a consistent thing throughout my life. Now, then when I was in high school, my mom, when I was still living in Japan, wrote me this newspaper article about this art therapist in Japan providing art therapy sessions to older adults in a nursing home. And I was like, this is exactly what I want to do with my life, right? And then I was already thinking about wanting to work with older adults. I just didn't know how to combine art and that part of me, right? And then I started looking and see, so how do I become art therapist? Where can I go? And then I found out coming to the US is one of the ways. So that's how art and art therapy were, how art therapy came into my life in that way. And then also related to this, so in undergrad, I studied art and psychology as double major. And then I moved on to get my master's degree in social work, along with the graduate level certification in art therapy. But throughout this, like around when I was 16, my father passed away suddenly because of brain aneurysm. And my family went through hell, as you can imagine, lots of grief. And then there was my sisters. I have two sisters, older and younger, back home. Three of us are all teenagers when this happened. And there's this mother of mine who is widowed, and it's just like it was a lot of very traumatic experience. And this experience and how I needed to maneuver with the grief and live with the grief, art became such a place to support me, help me understand what it is that I'm experiencing. So all of that is just coming together, art and the psychology and all of that through my formal education and the lived experience.
You know, it's interesting when I talk to people who are either licensed professionals, counseling, therapy, psychology. You know, I know there's a lot of different degrees or certifications within, you know, psychology in general. But one of my friends, he actually lost his father young as well. And I think when you have childhood trauma, you learn of how to become, I guess, more like emotionally mature at a younger age. So he actually went on to become a therapist as well. And I think, you know, that was really huge in how he's been able to, you know, just kind of go about his practice and his ways. So I think that's, you know, it's not, and I'm so sorry about your loss, but it's so interesting how that has shaped who you are to who you are today.
Yeah, I think something like this, these kind of experiences give people what it's like to feel pain.
Yep.
Right. And to me, like, I think about this a lot as well when I'm teaching. To me, that is a fundamental part of being a therapist. Are you, as a therapist, being able to understand the other people's pain in a real sense, right? Without that ability, where are you going with that, you know, therapy sessions?
Yep. And I think having the ability with empathy, so having the empathy, or, you know, my friend Joe, who's a licensed professional, always talks about empathy versus compassion, because compassion and empathy are two things where you also have to hold space for your client or patient, but at the same time, like, you have to also hold your boundary. So what is that, you know, balance between empathy and compassion there, and also, you know, holding your own space so you can so you can provide the best resource and advice or what have you, but also be able to leave the conversation and go about your day as well.
Right. And that's how the self-awareness comes in, right?
Let's talk about self-awareness, because self-awareness is definitely something to me that I am one of those people who crave, like, self-exploration. You know, I'm about to hit 30 years old and I'm like obsessed with like growth, right? Like self-growth, that journey and all that jazz. But at the same time, like, it takes perspective to have self-awareness. And I think, like, there's so much beauty in it, but it's also like the balance of what is also too much self-awareness, right? So tell me a little bit about your perspective and insight around self-awareness.
So let me preface this by maybe like explaining a little bit about how I think of therapy, maybe. Yeah. You know, like sometimes like how therapy as history, when it started, it was the Freud, psychoanalytic, like long-term therapy, sometimes lifetime, right? I don't really see our therapy sessions that way. And I don't think many therapists today see it that way neither. But how I particularly see therapy is it's like you come in because there's a need to learn something. And then you graduate from therapy too, much like you go to school and take course and then you learn something or you gain something and you leave, right? So for me, therapy is kind of similar to that. And then, so what it is that we are actually getting from coming into therapy sessions, and that's the self-awareness. So it's really the goal that you are coming in to find through therapy sessions. And most of the time, what happens, or like how this comes out, is usually when clients come in, there's a problem or challenge, there's an issue, and then there's a reaction to the issue. Right. And so then some reaction is in the form of emotion. Other times it's a form of thought. So emotion could be, I'm feeling really sad about things, or I'm just feeling depressed. that's emotions. Then sometimes the thought, like, I feel like I'm being a failure, for example. I don't feel worthy, let's say. And I start cultivating self-awareness from dissecting or really kind of understanding emotions or those thoughts that's popping up. So if it's thought that if the client is bringing in, then first thing that I may ask is, how did you learn to think that way? Who taught you that? Or what environment taught you that? Or what place, right? Because there's a history and the way that you actually lived your life that led to that thinking pattern. And if it's emotions, then sometimes like it's hard to know exactly what that looks like or what it is. Then I'll be using art making. Can you actually make images of what sadness looks like? Can we look at that together? What does it say about it? What is it trying to tell you? What's the function of this emotion? Dissect, dissect, dissect.
And it's interesting because it's like I also spoke to someone who said you don't have to wake up and be happy every day. Like emotions ebb and flow, right? But I think the self-awareness that you're talking about and you're and using therapy is, for example, the artist behind me, he's DC local, Alex, he sees circles in his head constantly. So that's why he creates circles. He has to do that. And I think, I'm butchering the name, so please bear with me. I think it's famous Japanese.
Sama?
Yeah.
Yayoi Sama.
I know was seeing the art as well. Like I know that was a way for her to process what was going on up in her brain, and it turned out to be beautiful. And I think to that point of being able to name those feelings and pinpoint where they're coming from, and then being able to process them and do something and know that feeling might come back. For example, grief, talking about, where it could be a while since your father passed away, but saying that, talking about it, you probably get some feeling of sadness and you can identify with that sadness. But I think the self-awareness is the biggest way for us, I think, in all of us to move through society. And I love in our lives, and I just love your approach to that, because at the end of the day, I think for a human being to function and be, function in a healthy manner, that being able to identify what those feelings are and speak to them, it could be your own way of processing, is just so important.
Yes. It's like when something is not really, like when your vision is clouded and you're not really like understanding what you're seeing, there is just like a discomfort that arises in your body, right?
Yeah.
So then with your therapist or with your friend, whoever, right? But being able to identify, this is exactly what I'm experiencing. This is exactly how I'm feeling. That moment is very, very important. And it really reduces the sense of distress.
Stress and anxiety. I'm reading Attached. I actually was reading Attached before you. Yeah. And I'm kind of just going through, it's like one of those things, and my mom always tells me, Jen, why do you keep harping on the past all the time? I said, Mom, I'm only trying to understand myself. I'm trying to understand feelings. Like once I understand them, I can move past the past. But I lived with so many years of suppressing that I didn't actually know what I was feeling. So now I'm feeling all the feelings and I'm trying to understand. And I think, people like to always think about future moving forward. It's like you can move forward once you address, in my opinion, right? I don't like using should or must, but address what is down here in order to really feel that sense of light and not being distressed on a day-to-day basis, which kind of goes into also another topic of, you talked about how you work with people from a variety of cultures. And I think, coming into, I like to call, America a melting pot of like, we have so many different cultures here and so many different, ways of communication. And you don't even know sometimes you could be offending someone because of how, again, you were raised, what you were taught, and how someone else was raised and taught. So I'm curious, because personally, I love the Japanese culture. I mean, I love it. I respect it. I just think like there's a lot of lessons that can be kind of, marinated around. And I'm curious kind of how has your identity has influenced your own self-awareness, and really how has it played to help others understand their own sense of self-awareness?
That's an excellent question. Probably the best way to describe my experience was that, or how I became self-aware, once again, right? Self-aware of my Japanese identity and what it means is to go back in time when I first came to this country when I was 18. And so it's been like 25 years or so, right? Since I've been here. So before I came here, I was living in Japan, right outside of Tokyo, being a Japanese person, surrounded by Japanese people, Japanese culture, whatever, right? And so Japanese identity to me, and the Japanese itself is like the air. You breathe it, but something about the air, right? We don't see it. You know it's there, but you don't really pay attention to that. So it was kind of like that for me. And then I landed in Iowa, middle of nowhere, Midwest, super countryside. The closest Walmart is like 30 minutes walk, that type of place, right? For my undergrad education, Jen. Yeah.
Complete different spectrums of everything. I mean,
oh my gosh. I have never been to a place like that in my life. I didn't know that kind of place existed. And I met lovely, lovely people who became my lifetime friends and family. And at the same time, that was a time that I painfully remember some of the moments, because I lived in a predominantly white community, right? And Japanese identity from that environment was really about, I experienced it as something negative, something strange, something weird, something to feel ashamed of sometimes, or something to be obsessed by certain people. And so there's just a lot of, quite a bit of microaggressions. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting that you and I are talking here, because speaking in public, it has been such a thing for me, because that past experience of being ridiculed, made fun of, being talked loud at when my accent was much stronger and people couldn't understand me comes back when I think about talking in front of people. Obviously, I've been teaching too, right? So,
and also, not to interrupt, but also, I mean, that's the whole thing where you've kind of done it all. I mean, well, maybe not necessarily like, giving the speeches at a TEDx talk, but which you should, but at the same time, like even giving, being a licensed profession, like a licensed therapist, I mean, and those intimate conversations too. I mean, you've done it all. So I mean, it's like it's interesting.
Well, I had to.
Yeah.
I had to. And this is a result of myself focusing on assimilating myself for the first 10 years of my life in this country, which comes from that the Japanese identity being seen as negative and experiencing racism and microaggression, right? I had to pick this surviving strategy called assimilation. Mm-hmm. And I did that for quite some time, first 10 years. And then at some point, I'm coming out of it thinking, like, what happened to my Japanese identity? And how can I show up to the therapy sessions in front of my clients as the whole person, not just this like a white therapist, like the white therapist and Asian skin. Let me just put it that way, because that's how sometimes school trains you, right? There isn't a lot of alternative perspective when I went to school. So if you are not being careful or being mindful, then what you come out of as a graduate, graduate of those programs could be that you are really Eurocentric therapist. And I'm going to admit that I was that person when I graduated then. And so the second half of my stay in this country is really about unlearning that process, as well as reclaiming my Japanese identity. And I'm still walking back the path, so to speak.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of We Are Everyone. You can subscribe to We Are Everyone on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and also be sure to visit www.pivotalmoments.org to learn more about the organization. And we also want to hear what mental wellness means to you. So you can follow us on social media, submit your video, and we will catch you next time. Thank you so much.